Happy Black History Month. Welcome to the final video in this year's series of Black History. In this video, I want to show that the importance of Black people in America began long before our country was even founded. For example, there were Black soldiers on both sides of the Revolutionary War. For a time, Great Britain was offering freedom to any slave that enlisted in Loyalist armies. But there was clear exploitation happening, even with that offer of freedom. Fight and survive, and they might even follow through. Colonel Tye was one man that fought and died before he could enjoy his liberty. He was a former slave turned soldier for the British Army during the Revolutionary War and one of the greatest guerrilla fighters of all time. Most of what we know about Colonel Tye's early life is speculative, but the general consensus is that he was a runaway slave from a Quaker based plantation ran by John Corliss. Corliss had a reputation for cruelty towards his slaves. It was common practice among the Quakers to teach slaves to read and write, and then grant them their freedom after they turned 21. But John Corliss rejected that practice. He was eventually kicked out of the Quakers for failing to adhere to their anti-slavery agreement, and because they considered him to be a drunken disgrace to their people. Corley's refusal to educate slaves meant that in addition to Tye's military achievements later in life, he also was self-educated, and by all accounts, he had a reputation as a brilliant tactician. After presumably fleeing from John Corliss, he headed to Virginia. Once in Virginia, he would hear about the Dunmore Proclamation, which led him to join the Ethiopian Regiment. So, during the Revolutionary War, there were two proclamations that in effect freed slaves. On November 7th, 1775, John Moray, the Earl of Dunmore and Royal Governor of Virginia, stated that in exchange for abandoning the Patriots and joining the British Army, he would grant any indentured servant their freedom. Later in June of 1779, General George Clinton made another proclamation that freed any slave in the colonies, regardless of military service, and promised them freedom, land, and assistance resettling. Because of policies like these, the American Revolution had a profound effect on the institution of slavery. It gave enslaved African Americans unprecedented opportunities to escape from slavery by serving in the British and the Continental armies, although more on the Patriot side of that later. Other enslaved people took advantage of the chaos to run away and forge new lives elsewhere. When the American Revolution began, there were about 450,000 enslaved people in the 13 colonies, while estimates put the number of freed individuals between 80,000 to 100,000. The Dunmore and Phillipsburg proclamations would be the most common way to obtain freedom until the end of the Civil War. Now, I want to note that the only reason these proclamations were made was because Lord Dunmore and General Clinton were so fearful and in need of military support that they were forced to free slaves. It did not happen because of some moral revelation, and while the British government never established laws concerning the practice of slavery, they did nothing to stop the slave trade in the colonial era. It wouldn't be until 1883 that they would officially abolish slavery. It would seem that the freedom of Black people was used as a weapon in times of war, as a means to bolster the ranks of armies, or, in the Civil War, to hamstring the economical power of those that relied on slave labor. Morality had nothing to do with it. Even after being legally free, the use of Black people as servants to the state through prison labor continued throughout the country and is still prevalent today. Colonel Tye was one of the many people to take advantage of the Dunmore Proclamation. In his first combat at the Battle of Monmouth on June 28, 1778, he captured a rebel militia captain, earning him respect among his fellow loyalists. He would continue to build a reputation and eventually earn the honorary title of colonel. He led a small band of guerrilla fighters and led many successful raids, assisting the Loyalist army by capturing food, resources, and even enemy leaders. Due to his efforts, he would be given his own command over a group of all Black soldiers in 1779, which would commonly be called the Black Brigade. While leading this group, he successfully raided areas throughout Monmouth County. The brigade targeted Patriots who formerly owned slaves, as well as executing Loyalists without giving the British the opportunity to ransom, and generally just making life hell for the Revolutionary Army in the surrounding area. In addition to his military actions, he often assisted the people he freed to escape the colonies. He helped them gain transport to Nova Scotia, the Caribbeans, and other areas where the British had begun settling the emancipated slaves. Many call him the most important black soldier in the Revolution. Historians often wonder how quickly the war would have been won if he was on the side of the Patriots. While black patriots were not the focus of my research for this video, I could only find one instance of colonial Americans granting slaves their freedom dependent on military service. The Boston's Bucks of America. They assisted with security and policing forces in wartime Boston. Most other references to black patriots were Northern freemen who were promised wealth and status for joining the fight. Over these past 4 weeks, I've studied individuals from a variety of time periods. Looking at the progress we've made as a culture has been pretty revealing. What is evident to me is that black people have always been treated like a commodity from the moment they were brought here, and that attitude persists to this day. They were forced to serve white masters as slaves until war forced white men to recruit them as fighters. Even then, our country that was supposedly founded on principles of freedom continued to oppress and enslave black people. When the next war broke out, it was only due to the necessities of the Union's strategy that black people were freed, and even then, it took years for the southern states to abide by that ruling. Since then, the country has continued the policy of arresting, charging, and over-convicting black people into state servitude. Every step forward has been hard fought, and the meager winnings are often enforced poorly by the powers that be. During the writing of this script, another Minnesotan resident was shot dead in his own home by the police officers who entered. According to media outlets, his name was not on the warrant. It took the police officers 10 seconds to end the life of a person who wasn't under investigation and was barely conscious enough to act. This comes just 2 years after the murder of George Floyd. Why does this keep happening? Why do police officers decide to end the lives of black people on the drop of a dime when they won't even subdue white people committing an act of domestic terror in the heart of our country's capital? These are uncomfortable questions to consider, especially for those in power. When it comes to protecting the interests of themselves versus acting in the interests of people, our leaders have made poor decisions. If they sought alternative solutions to current policing practices, then the prison industry would fold, and with it, the economical advantages of having workers indentured to the state, being paid far less than the minimum wage. According to research done by the United States Sentencing Committee, black males were given sentences 19.1% longer than white males who committed similar offenses. Violence in past criminal history didn't seem to play a major role on the sentencing lengths. And black prisoners were up to 21.2% less likely to receive non-government sponsored early release assistance. If they were lucky enough to get this treatment, they still had to spend about 16.8% longer in the release programs than white prisoners. In 2016, the Federal Bureau of Prisons released statistics stating that 50% of inmates were serving sentences in the range of 5 to 15 years, and 51% of prisoners fall in the age range of 31 to 45. The picture this paints is one of the government taking advantage of the prime earning years of its inmates, especially its black inmates who serve longer than their white counterparts and receive less assistance from non-government sources. For the final video in this year's Black History Month, I'd like you to think about the responsibility we have, individually, as a community, and as a country to make sure that we all have the opportunity to enjoy our basic liberties. The black community continues to suffer across the board. Black trans people are killed at an appalling rate. Police are still cracking down and shooting first. There are ways you can support the fight for racial equality. At the end of each of my videos, I've talked about places you can donate and assist, but we can also help supporting black artists and businesses. The month may end, but the fight for racial justice never does. Not until everyone has their rights. If one person fights, we all fight. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you watching this video.